In a way, yes. The structure you're describing shares some ideals with the goals of socialism and communism, such as reducing inequality and ensuring that resources and power are distributed more equitably. However, by utilizing decentralized, this approach aims to achieve these goals without centralizing power in a state or governing body. This could potentially avoid some of the pitfalls seen in historical attempts at communism and socialism by preventing the concentration of power.
Have a future.
Can you define communism? Okay, can you define communism for me real quick?
And they
Define
came here for a
communism with
better-
your last 3
they
seconds?
came here for-
Yes.
Socialist. Do you know,
but-
real quick, can you define socialism for me?
Because
Great
these
question.
socialism policies, these
What's
individualistic
socialism?
policies.
Welcome to the Freedom Unchained channel. What is communism? That's the question of today. What is this ideology that the right wails against and the left seems to silently promote? As you've seen those first clips, those were clips from the Jubilee channel. It was a liberal debating a bunch of conservative Trump supporters. And let me tell you, if you go watch that, he got destroyed. And his only argument he could stop from getting destroyed was to ask people what was communism or what was socialism. So let's dig a little deeper into those clips and let's see what both sides think socialism and communism is.
Have a future.
Can you define communism?
Yeah, basically it's mob rule. It's Marxism. It's mob rule. It's
False. Literally all wrong. Communism is a stateless, classless, moneyless society.
Yes.
Socialist. Do you know,
but-
real quick, can you define socialism for me?
When I'm speaking about socialism, I'm talking about the redistribution of wealth and like promoting the welfare system.
Okay, so I mean, socialism is just a mode of production, so it just has to do with the workers owning the means of production. Okay, can you define communism for me real quick?
Communism is someone who constantly dictates what's happening, and they average out everyone for the minority, for the majority. Everyone has to have the same houses. I mean, you look at Cuba; everybody has to have the same houses. If you go to a Latin American country, they are not pro-abortion. They are not.
Okay, so real quick, that's not what communism is. Communism is a stateless, classless, moneyless society, right? And once again, right, this rhetoric from a right, just kind of calling anything that they don't like communism, just kind of reminds me of the Red Scare in the
Well, it's the same.
And they
Define
came here for a
communism with
better-
your last 3
they
seconds?
came here for a better opportunity in loving America, and that's what patriotism is about.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
But at least one doesn't give in to his shitty debate tactics.
As a liberal, what are you reflecting that's benefiting your
course.
country?
Of course. Great
'Cause
question.
These socialism policies, these
What's
individualistic
socialism?
policies, these I want to consume these egotistic policies, these you should worship in closed doors and proximities. Don't open the Bible in school. Don't say the Pledge of Allegiance. All
Okay,
these
do you mind
things
if I
that we
respond?
see. No, yes. Just let me clarify. We'll finish real quick. So all these things that we see, we're being forced as conservatives to shut that down, to be quiet, to be banned. So how are we talking about free speech, freedom of religion, loving, and all this stuff? These are all things that you guys are proclaiming, but
Yeah, so do you agree with
don't
freedom
really
of
see
religion?
that. Of course.
Well, the left definitely doesn't believe in the freedom of religion, or at least the First Amendment, because it covers a broad idea of the rights, not just including free speech and freedom of religion. But we'll get into that another day. But freedom of religion, I believe, also covers the freedom to believe whatever you wish to believe. And that includes, not limited to, what you believe in law. Like the one thing I believe is man cannot make law. But back to communism. What is communism? He believes it's a stateless, classless, moneyless society, which none of that really kind of works together. To have a classless society, you would need a state to suppress all the other classes. You want a even distribution of wealth is pretty much what a classless society is. So you would have to take from another group of people or keep them from being more productive than another class of people. And you would need the state to do that. And socialism, he says it's a mode of production where workers own the means of production, which just means you make a state to manage the business. These ideas are ridiculous. These ideas are just put out there for the upper class, the elite class, the ones that believe they rule the world, to control you and suppress you, to make you use these ideas that they feed to you So you spend your whole life trying to promote them and change the world based off of these ideologies. And then you're just going to use the state to do this. And the more state you give power to, the less rights you have. This is what socialism and communism is. But don't take my word on it. Let's see what Karl Marx believes socialism is, what he wanted to implement. Because that's what most of these communists follow, is Karl Marx ideas. Let's ask ChatGPT what communism is and what Karl Marx 10 pillars are. Can you tell me what communism is?
Sure. Communism is a political and economic ideology that aims for a classless society in which all property and resources are communally owned. In theory, under communism, everyone works and contributes to society according to their ability and receives according to their needs. The ultimate goal is to eliminate class distinctions and create a society where wealth and power are shared equally among all.
Can you give me the 10 pillars of Marxist communism?
Certainly, the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, outlined by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, are as follows. 1. Abolition of private property. Property rights are to be replaced by communal ownership, with the state managing resources. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. The more one earns, the higher percentage they pay in taxes. 3. Abolishing of all rights of inheritance, preventing wealth from being passed down to heirs to reduce inequality. 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels, taking away the property of those who oppose or leave the regime. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state, a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. The government controls all means of communication and transportation. 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The state takes control of production and plans the economy. 8. Equal liability of all to labor. Everyone must work, and labor is organized for the common good. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries.
I was told there was 10 pillars, one about free school, public school.
Yes, you're right. Let's continue with the list, including the point about education. 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolishing children's factory labor in its present form and combining education with industrial production to promote equal opportunity for all children. These planks were meant to serve as a platform for transitioning to a communist society by first implementing these state-controlled measures.
It sounds like an ideology for stupid people, or people that just really don't know how the world works, and for the evil people that want to run the world, to manipulate the other people that don't know how the world works. Because you're trying to create a stateless society, a classless, stateless society, by using the state, because that's the only way you can accomplish these goals. But the sad part is they've accomplished a lot of their goals for their pillars or planks of communism. Pretty much, probably all of them. George Gordon would say that, at least. If you haven't watched my George Gordon series, go in the description. I'll leave the playlist for you guys. His first video actually goes through all of this back in 1986. Explains how the American people have already adopted all the communist pillars, including indoctrinating your children in their schools, giving up your land to the state, implementing taxes to steal you from your hard-earned energy, and so on. I'll leave that clip at the end of this video so you can get a little more detail on how communism has infested the American people and the American mind. We've lost our values, we lost our morals in this country. there is no true law here anymore. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe communism isn't that bad. Let's see if they have any more principles that might sway me to the other side. Are there any more fundamental beliefs of communism?
Yes, beyond the 10 planks, there are several core principles in communist ideology. Class struggle. Communists believe that history is defined by class struggles between the working class, proletariat, and the owning class, bourgeoisie. Abolition of capitalism. Communism seeks to replace the capitalist system, which is seen as exploitative, with a system where the workers control the means of production. Revolution. Marxist theory advocates for a proletarian revolution to overthrow the bourgeoisie and establish a classless society. Dictatorship of the proletariat. This refers to a transitional socialist state where the working class has control of political power, paving the way for a classless society. Internationalism. Communists believe that the struggle is global and advocate for international solidarity among the working class across nations.
These seem like principles that were wanted because of the control of the elite class, which in fundamental terms, America in practice really wouldn't have.
In practice, implementing these principles has proven challenging and has often led to outcomes that differ significantly from the original ideals. In many historical instances, efforts to abolish class distinctions led to the concentration of power in the hands of a few, rather than true classlessness. This resulted in authoritarian regimes rather than the classless, stateless society that communism envisions.
So these pillars actually want a state, and not stateless society. Wouldn't that be correct?
Yes, that's correct. The 10 planks outlined by Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto describe measures for a transitional phase toward communism involving a strong state apparatus. This phase is sometimes referred to as the dictatorship of the proletariat, where the state is used to dismantle the structures of capitalism. The idea is that eventually the state would wither away, leading to a classless and stateless society. However, in practice, this withering away has not been realized in the historical examples of communist states.
So without capitalism, you really don't have a free market, and the market is just controlled by the state, and the class would be...
That's right.
And the two classes...
In theory, under a fully realized communist system, in the context of communism, the aim is to eliminate class distinctions altogether, creating a classless society. In practice, however, during the transitional phase toward communism, there are generally two main classes: the working class, or proletariat, and the ruling class, which in a communist state would ideally be a representation of the proletariat's interests, often embodied by the Communist Party leadership. In reality, this has often led to a new form of class distinction, with party officials and bureaucrats holding significant power over the rest of the population.
And in principle, most of the time when man gets power, they don't want to relinquish power. They continue to try to grow their power. Isn't that true?
Yes, historically, it's often been the case that those in power seek to maintain and expand their power. This tendency can pose a significant challenge in systems where power is concentrated, as it can lead to authoritarianism or the establishment of a ruling class, even in systems that aim for classlessness like communism. This is why checks and balances, as well as transparent governance, are crucial in any political system to prevent the abuse of power.
So the best economy would be a free market where we have no government but a free exchange of ideas that allows markets to thrive based off of production of a man's idea.
Free market economy, where individuals and businesses freely exchange goods, services, and ideas, can drive innovation and efficiency. Without government intervention, proponents argue that the market could self-regulate through supply and demand, rewarding productivity and innovation. However, critics of a completely unregulated free market argue that it can lead to significant inequalities and monopolies without some form of oversight. A balance between free market principles and regulatory frameworks is often sought to harness the benefits of both.
Well, most of the time, regulation is based off of a centralized government, which is just the people that actually control it. So wouldn't it be better just to decentralize the regulations so man can control the bad actors within the...
Decentralizing regulations could, in theory, allow for more localized and context-specific governance. It might empower communities to address issues and regulate bad actors based on their unique needs and values. This approach aligns with ideas of self-governance and autonomy, reducing reliance on a central authority that may be disconnected from local realities. However, coordinating and enforcing such decentralized regulations could be complex, and there's a risk of inconsistency and conflict between different localities. Balancing local control with overarching principles would be key.
Well, wouldn't we be able to secure information on a blockchain and to be able to have governance via a blockchain that would limit man from being able to manipulate the laws?
Yes, using blockchain technology for governance could provide transparency and security, making it more difficult for individuals to manipulate rules or data. Blockchain's decentralized nature means that no single entity has control, and all changes are recorded transparently. Smart contracts could automate and enforce rules without human intervention, reducing the risk of corruption. However, it's important to design these systems carefully, as the code is only as fair and just as the people who create it.
So wouldn't the best fundamental structure for a governance on a blockchain
It sounds like you're considering the best
to be based off of God's laws, or I call it true law?
Basing a blockchain governance system on a set of immutable principles, which you refer to as God's laws or true law, could aim to create a fair and just system. These principles would need to be universally accepted and clearly defined to ensure they are applied consistently across the board. The challenge would be in agreeing upon what constitutes these fundamental laws and translating them into code that governs the blockchain.
Well, it doesn't need to be consistent throughout everything because of the decentralization of all of everything. They would allow the best functioning societies to come forth as the evolution of the blockchain and the idea of true law evolves.
That's an interesting perspective. Decentralization does allow for experimentation and evolution within different communities or societies. As each community adopts and adapts blockchain governance based on their interpretation of true law, successful models could emerge as examples for others. This evolutionary approach could foster diverse interpretations and applications, leading to a dynamic and resilient system of governance.
So wouldn't this structure of society be about the same that the socialists and the communists are trying to strive toward, without the governance or the state that will manipulate and destroy economies?
In a way, yes. The structure you're describing shares some ideals with the goals of socialism and communism, such as reducing inequality and ensuring that resources and power are distributed more equitably. However, by utilizing decentralized blockchain technology, this approach aims to achieve these goals without centralizing power in a state or governing body. This could potentially avoid some of the pitfalls seen in historical attempts at communism and socialism by preventing the concentration of power.
That's all, thank you. So what we have learned is communism and socialism is just an ideology for people that want to do good in the world. They want rainbows and butterfly kisses and candy, hugs, and only sunshiny days. But in reality, it only ends in concentrated wealth for the elite 13 families that want to destroy this world, and death and destruction at their hands, while there's not a classless society, but a two-class society where the elites are forcing the poor, low class, because that's all the classes that can be, are the two classes, and the ones forcing the other one to build things and makes their lives in their images. But I believe there's only one way to get to the ends that the communists and the socialists want, a better world. It's through an anarchist world using blockchain, decentralized blockchain, where we have millions and trillions of decentralized autonomous organizations ran on the blockchain, protected by the blockchain, ran on for smart contracts where it can't be corrupted by man, but can be protecting the law, the true law. If you guys want to know what true law is, make sure you go down to the description and join the Sovereign's Way Club and start learning what true law is and how to protect yourself from these actual socialist communists that want to implement their ideology that in the end only destroy the world. There's only one way to protect yourself through that, and it's by understanding law. So don't wait, do that now, join the club, and don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video around, get it to everybody that you know, especially your communist friends. Leave a comment, let's get a conversation started. And until next time, I'm going to leave you guys in the love and the light of the One Infinite Creator. Peace.
Let's take a little test and a little review of these 10 planks to see just what communists do when they get up in the morning to go to work. The first plank to the Communist Manifesto, remember this now, was published in 1848. Not 1936 or 1952, but 1848. First plank calls for the abolition of property in land and the application of all rent in land to public purposes. Well, at first blush, that's a little ambiguous. Just exactly how would we put that into practice if we were a communist? Well, up in Idaho, there's about 88,000 square miles of real estate, and of the 88,000 square miles, 64% of it's owned by the federal and the state governments. 36% is owned by individuals, private landowners, small businessmen, people just like you. Of that 64%, the BLM and the Department of Agriculture control almost all of it. Farmers up there rent land from the BLM to graze their cattle on. The money is then taken and used for the general fund. It's sent to Washington. When there's a timber sale, the proceeds of those timber sales go to Washington, to the general fund. Those are rents on public land. What about the other 36%? Well, up in Idaho, 75% of the entire state budget is spent on public education. Let me repeat that. 75 cents out of every tax dollar in Idaho goes to public education. I went to a committee meeting one time and I suggested that they give 100% to the teachers and the public schools. And forget about all other activities of government. And that way the teachers wouldn't have to come back every year and lobby for more money. That way they'd have it all. They're there every year anyway. I suppose every year they must want a little more. So next year they want 78%, and the year after 80 and 85 and 90, 95. Give it all to them, and then we don't need the legislature to come in and pass a lot of other screwy laws. Well, getting back to the point, the other 36% of the land then is taxed. Every square foot of Idaho is taxed. It's called a land tax, and that money is used for public purposes. The first plank to the Communist Manifesto was practiced in its entirety and its total application by everybody in the state of Idaho every day of their lives. And the 10th plank to the Communist Manifesto calls for the free education of all children in public schools. Let me tell you how that scam works. We have public schools in every town and village, every hamlet, and all of the teachers are publicly financed. All of the schools are publicly financed. They have statutes there and laws. They force everybody to send their children to the public schools, and those who are rebels, those people are put in the state penitentiary and their children are taken away from them. How many of you people in this audience have ever been to a public school? Oh, my goodness. Are you from Idaho? I thought you people down here were different. Well, surely there must be some differences here between Arizona and Idaho. The second plank that I want to bring to your attention calls for the heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Boy, that's a real sleeper. There's an agency in Idaho called the Idaho State Tax Commission, and then there's a federal agency called the IRS. That's a euphemism for Internal Revenue Service. Those are government agencies. They take 17 to 75% of all of the productivity of every person who works in the state of Idaho. The reason that I want to warn you about that is that somebody might suggest that you people institute an income tax in the state of Arizona. Let me warn you that it could cost you a lot of money, 17 to 75% of everything you create and produce. In 1900, if you'd have suggested that to your great-grandfather, he would have responded by, "That's preposterous." I agree. The third plank calls for the abolition of all right of inheritance, and in Idaho there is no right to inheritance. We have an inheritance tax there. It takes about 28 to 35% of the estate. The people in Idaho practice this inheritance law. They have replaced the old law of Moses calling for the inheritance of the family lands going to the firstborn son, and now the people up there get marriage licenses and they buy and sell land in violation of Leviticus 25:23. Having then abolished the common law practice to inheritance, they've now adopted the civil law practice, and with a three-party contract by way of the marriage license, when Sally and Joe marry, they do so by creating a limited general partnership with the state of Idaho, so that now there's three partners: Joe, Mary, and the state. And then when Joe dies, Mary wants all of the bonds and the stocks, the houses, the condominiums, the cars, the motorcycles, all of the toys that they've accumulated all of their lives. And the state simply comes in and says, "Buy me out." And they always want cash. This necessitates then the sale of all the toys to raise the cash to buy the third partner out. That's the third plank to the Communist Manifesto. In the event that somebody would suggest an inheritance tax in place of your inheritance law under the common law, let me suggest that you think it through very carefully. It'll cost you 1/3 of everything you create and produce when your spouse dies. Now, the fourth plank calls for the confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Up in Idaho, some people are beginning to rebel against the 75% tax. And in order to keep those people in line, we have things called SWAT teams, highway patrolmen, IRS special tax task forces, and other governmental agencies. They padlock businesses, lien houses and properties, seize bank accounts, and jail people without due process or equal protection. You might want to keep that in mind, because in Idaho, the fourth plank to the Communist Manifesto is in full force and effect every single day. Number 5 calls for the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Up in Idaho, we practice this with little green pieces of paper. No one uses gold and silver coin. Everyone uses Federal Reserve notes. They're issued by the Federal Reserve banks nationally, and they're distributed by our local banks like Idaho First National. Oh, it's nice to know that you people here in Arizona, of course, use gold and silver pursuant to your Constitution. Number 6 calls for the centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. This is accomplished by the Federal Communications Commission. Every radio and television station, every newspaper, every means of communication, whether it be mass or local media, is in some form of corporate or juristic capacity, and they're licensed and regulated by the state. The means of transportation is controlled by ports of entry. Every truck moving across the state must enter these ports of entry, even though Article 1, Section 9 of the Federal Constitution says, no state shall compel any vessel to enter, clear, or pay duties in a port of entry. In the event that someone brings up the suggestion that you establish way stations and ports of entry in your state, you might want to consider that 6th plank. The 7th calls for the extension of factories and the instruments of production owned by the state, and the bringing into cultivation of wasteland and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. This is accomplished in our state by use of FMC, J.R. Simplot, and other agribusinesses. In fact, every business in Idaho is an extension of factories and the instruments of production owned by the state, and they're called corporations. In the event that you have someone suggest corporate capacity and corporations in your state, you might want to keep the 7th plank of the Communist Manifesto in mind. The bringing into cultivation of wastelands is accomplished by use of the Desert Land Entry Act. You can buy land from the state and you can farm it as long as you get a permit to drill a well and a permit to draw the right amount of water out of the ground and a permit to grow what the state recommends that you grow on that land. And then finally, the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan in Idaho is called soil conservation districts. Watch that one, it's a sleeper. In the Soviet Union, they call them central planning and state farms. In Idaho, we call them soil conservation districts and corporate agribusiness. Number 8 calls for the equal liability of all to labor and the establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. This equal liability of all to labor is accomplished in Idaho by means of the Social Security account. Everybody belongs to the industrial army. It works just like the Army, Navy, and Marines. You can't get a job without one. Every business has either a Social Security account, a federal tax number, a state tax number, and or a sales tax number. Many businesses have all 4. Number 9 calls for the combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries and the gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of population over the country. This has been accomplished in this country since 1922, when we reached the peak of private land ownership. In 1920, when the census was taken, the United States had approximately 100 million people. 2 years later, we reached the zenith of private land ownership with 47 million people, nearly 1 in every 2 persons owning land. Land under the common law is the foundation of all wealth, because all wealth comes from the land, and without private ownership of land, there can be no private rights under the Bill of Rights? Well, by 1940, the number of private landowners had dropped from 47 million to 32 million. But of course, this equitable distribution of the population over the land was excused by the Dust Bowl and the Depression years. Between 1940 and 1950, the number dropped from 32 million to 15 million. And the reason? Well, we just went through World War II, and we needed Sam the farmer and his wife to go to Detroit to build airplanes and ships for the war. Between 1950 and 1969, the number further declined from 15 million to 6 million. Between 1969 and 85, the number dropped from 6 million to 3 million in 1985. At this time, there are 268,000 farm foreclosures going on across the United States every year. By the turn of the century, every one of you will be more equitably redistributed, or redistribution will have been accomplished over the United States. And of course, the 10th plank, the free education of all children in public schools. Now, if we were to reflect on what we've just read and what we have just heard, I ask the question, why did you spend $235 billion last year on national defense? And of course, the obvious answer is to protect us from the atheistic hordes of communism from imposing upon us a foreign and alien ideology.